Grow CFO is where finance leaders grow together. Join thousands of like-minded professionals using Grow CFO to access the combined knowledge and experience of the finance leader community. You can join us today, growcfo.net. Hello and welcome to the Grow CFO Show. I'm your host, Kevin Appleby, and today I've got Rachel Anevski with me. Now, Rachel isn't a CFO, isn't a finance person. She's a people person, an HR person. She works as a chief executive officer of her own company, which supplies fractional CHROs. So, Rachel, as part of our mini-series on the CFO and the interacting with the rest of the C-suite, we're going to talk today about the CFO working with the CHRO. But before we get into that, welcome to the Grow CFO Show.
I'm so happy to be here. Thank you for having me.
Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Certainly. So I will tell you that I have spent my entire career working with people in accounting and finance. They're some of the best people. They drink real well, so I'm happy to hang out with them. But my background comes from deep-rooted in human resources and in psychology. I have a criminal psychology degree, undergraduate degree, and organizational behavior master's. And I worked in the public accounting industry for about 12 years as the director of human resources, director of people, human capital, director of marketing and business development. And right after the downturn of the economy, or at least one of them in my career, I had asked my firm that I had been with for many years to become a partner. At that juncture, I had been developing the infrastructure of their clients. So I had created a profit center for the HR department working within that public accounting firm. And that was a time where non-CPAs were not thought of for partner. And as such, we parted ways, and they became my very first client at my business that has been now in business for almost 12 years, Matters of Management. And Matters of Management, although it is the acronym for MOM, we don't employ moms, and outside of that, I am one. We might work some mom hours, but Matters of Management spends time in 4 different areas collaborating with people in the accounting and finance industry on the people processes, on the people side. So we provide fractional human resource executives to a wide host of industries and organizations, and we provide direct hire staffing, some merger and acquisition support from a human resources perspective, and executive coaching. So those 4 areas.
So as a business is growing, the CFO, generally in my experience, gets to do all of the jobs that nobody else wants to do. So you probably haven't got a CIO to start off with, so the CFOs possibly look after some of the IT systems. You probably don't have anybody in charge of your estate, so estate management, facilities management tends to be picked up by the CFO, administration, legal, but finance run the payroll. So looking after all the people things seems to fall under the CFO's role in that early stage. Now, your organization must frequently be taking that role off CFOs. Tell me a little bit about what should the CFO be thinking about in terms of managing people versus having another member of the C-suite to do it?
Well, first, I'd like to think that we're like the BFF of the CFO, right? So the best friend forever. The first thing is, I do believe a business owner. So if you're looking at a scalable business, an entrepreneurial business from a true growth perspective, and we do a lot of infrastructure, we do organizational development. So the infrastructure and scalability from a people perspective is where we support an organization mostly. We do it from an initial standpoint and from a reorganization standpoint. But I think a lot of times business owners believe that finance controls the people because it executes on payroll. But payroll, for 2 reasons, is not necessarily always considered an HR function. Some organizations will think it's a finance function because it's taking from one pot and giving to the employees. From our perspective, we see it as recruitment and retention and really integral in the people process. So my team absolutely does payroll. But the other thing that we find out with CFOs that are growing internally or growing a business that have either been gifted payroll and people or have inherited it over time, maybe a family member had done it at one point in time, and now we got a CFO and CFO gets it, and however this all goes, is that it's an actual body of knowledge. Payroll itself is a body of knowledge. And the industry of payroll with compliance and access to information, legal, it has become its really own large entity of learning. And when a CFO is charged with so many high priority things, making sure that payroll is executed accurately, efficiently, and following all of the guidelines of payroll, and then having to deal with the basic level of my app isn't working and you took out the wrong deduction and I don't see my time off request on my pay stub. All of those things become voluminous and really take away from the true work of a CFO. So yes, we absolutely from that perspective come in and put a smile on our CFO's face by taking over that process and the problems that go with it.
Yeah. So I think the interesting thing is that we've hit on two very different aspects of doing this. We've got the moving money from company account to employee's account and paying the taxes, which is what payroll is essentially about. You could argue that is a finance process, and there's no problem with somebody in the finance team doing it. But then at the other extreme, you're talking about recruitment and retention, which are very much, there are some hard skills, but there are loads and loads of soft people skills then come into that. Do you see typically that the CFO can be the wrong person to get involved in that process? Or would you expect to have managed to get to CFO? It's about more than finance skills. It's about having a load of other skills. What is it that would say that's better not done by the CFO?
Yeah, I think that for a CFO to be truly successful and to be seen as a success in the organization is not determined by the metric of people, but determined by the metric of financial growth, company stability, a large footprint, and that CFO's ability to manage the pillars of infrastructure. Some would even say, though, however, that a COO or a VP would manage above perhaps a CFO. And it's always been interesting to me the way people call people are titles. But I do think that a growing company or a company, for example, legacy owned companies, second generation, third generations, they have put a CFO in charge of all of the people and in charge of your IT director and of all of these things. And they just do it because they believe that if someone's good with money, they'll be good with people. And I don't necessarily find that to be the case most frequently. And I do think that there's a lot of soft skills involved. And I have met some really brilliant CFOs that are kind-hearted and love the people and treat them really well. However, again, it's this other body of knowledge of understanding the culture of an organization and then transferring culture into the acquisition of new people that will take your company to the next level. That skill, I don't believe a CFO has passion for,
right?
If that makes sense. That's not the reason.
That's an interesting term, has passion for. Doesn't
whether they could do it.
Yeah, could do it. But is it what they actually wanted? They didn't become a CFO to do that stuff. They became a CFO to be part of the team managing the strategy, to be part of the team looking after the mergers and the acquisitions and the fundraising. Yeah, that makes total sense. Rachel, if we're going to separate the CFO's role from the CHRO's role, the Chief HR Officer, how do you think those two should be working together?
Well, the whole purpose of Matters of Management, the reason why we created the fractional CHRO is because we didn't necessarily believe that every organization required full-time, very expensive person sitting in a room with the door open, waiting for people to come in and complain. Because oftentimes that is the visual. We get the whole Lucy card with the 5 cents with "give me your problems." That's not what we do. So I think that what ends up happening is we take a significant workload from the CFO in terms of, as I mentioned, culture, recruitment, retention, benefits, payroll, sometimes a full-time job itself. We find in certain companies, it's probably at max a day and a half of core work that we are taking from a CFO and then giving to someone who's expert level in it at a CHRO level, expert level in it. And now not only have we reduced the time to do the job, but now we're able to, at an executive level, have a seat at the table to talk about people strategy and look at the collaborative group of people, see what their weaknesses are, see what their strengths are, develop job descriptions, develop the growth of job descriptions, what we have today versus what we need in 5 years, as you know, with digital transformation, looks very different. And we have that skill set to then identify skill gaps on a staff level. These are not activities that a CFO has time for or even thinks about. So these are where we are able to reduce workload for CFO, put him back to work on what's important for him, take over a piece of the job, make it more efficient, do it in less time, and then bring an additional level of strategy to the table, working with the CFO. Because I always see it as a multiple of threes. And maybe that's because I worked with public accountants for so long and I understand the billable hours so well. But I always look at, as an HR person, which is an unusual thing, but because I've worked with financial people for so long, I look at what the growth plan is and how much new revenue it will take for us to then hire a new employee to make that employee profitable. So I look at those numbers and then start to think about who are our next 3 hires and where we can go from there in terms of developing the people and who we need to top grade. I could have this conversation all day, every day.
Brilliant.
That we do.
That takes us into a really interesting area at the moment. In Grow CFO, we're talking a lot at the moment about finance transformation. We're talking about AI making a big difference in what we do on a day-to-day basis. We're talking about having better systems for interrogating data, more integration between systems.
Yep.
And the upshot of this is that the role of the average member of the finance team is going to change unrecognizably over the next 5 years. Now,
1,000%.
Yeah. So I think right in the center of the CFO's problems right now are going to be, how do I upskill or reshape this finance team?
It's all of the teams,
but about that, or should the CHRO be worrying about that?
So that to me is a collaborative approach. And it just so happens that I had mentioned to you earlier that I'm in a doctoral program. And one of the areas that I've been heavily focused on is digital transformation in the finance industry, specifically because we have all of these new AI programs helping to make us more efficient. At the same time, we have an aging workforce and an uninterested new generation that we would have wanted to come into the industry. But year over year, the numbers coming into finance specifically have been dropping. So we have this gap in our workforce. And not only do we have a gap in workforce in terms of who's going to do the work, but the rate in which we're going to need people is something that is being highly spoken about, which is an HR concern and a CFO concern. Because if we don't have the people with the right skill set, how are we going to get the work done? And we really look at this in terms of competitive advantage. And for me, competitive advantage for any organization is the responsibility of CFO, CHRO, and business owner or a board. Because you can say all you want that you have enough money to hire a specific workforce with skill set. And if you haven't engaged the right people, you'll continue to experience turnover and you'll continue to reinvent the wheel. It's a handshake responsibility. And again, I'll say this is why being best friends, the CHRO and the CFO working together, is a real success story.
Yeah, and there's some interesting things that you've mentioned there that I'd like to just go back and unpick a little bit. First one, aging workforce in finance.
Yeah.
Is that necessarily a problem?
Yes and no. So the first thing is we haven't found a way. I'll take it in 2 different places. I'll take it in banking and I'll take it in public accounting firms. So in the banking industry, we haven't yet figured out a way to re-engage an aging workforce. In public accounting industry, we continue to retire an aging workforce. And so reskilling or redeploying knowledge when we are living longer hasn't yet been solved. Instead, we've put emphasis and thrown money at a younger and newer workforce to invest all our dollars. And that younger and newer workforce leaves much quicker. So it's the thought process here hasn't caught up in terms of strategy and a way to really be effective to retain institutional knowledge and match it with the changing environment. And I think the companies that figure that out quickly will do great. There's only one company I know, one bank, Valley National Bank. It's a global bank, but Valley National Bank had created a program that over 5 years of time deployed transformation with AI, with certain proprietary programs, and retained staff in doing so, reskilled staff to be competitive. And they're doing really well with it. And they talk about it. And it's outside of them. On the banking side, you have Deloitte doing a lot of research in this area and trying to figure it out because they've got the manpower to figure it out. But you have the bulk of the work being done at mid-size and smaller companies with the CFOs spread out instead of being in a collaborative group. And you'll see the dysfunction in all of those little areas, and they have not yet figured it out.
So is reskilling an older workforce a particular problem? And I say that because if I was in a company as CFO or a senior finance person, I'd probably be classed as a member of that older workshop. But I've had a career
40 years old or over is the age discrimination. So 40
I've had a
is your
career
marker.
where I've loved playing with tech. And even now, I like getting a hold of some of this AI stuff and playing with it and seeing what it can do and messing about with it. So I don't feel at all disenfranchised by it. Is that a problem that perhaps I'm the exception to the rule rather than the rule?
You're not the exception. It's the it's an introspective issue. So it's where we invest our training dollars is on the lower end and not on the higher end. We don't believe that we should continue to train existing aging workforces. We believe we should continue to invest and train the younger population that will leave us in 3 to 5 years. People have figured out that we should throw money at a problem instead of look at what the problem actually is.
Yeah. Let's look at that other end of the workforce. You said there were fewer people coming into finance. Then you said the people that do come in are not staying around as long.
No,
so
they're not.
Double whammy there.
It's a double whammy. And this has been a problem. So in my research, it's been a 100-year issue of people leaving accounting industry and finance industry. We find two real pieces of the problem to be cultural alignment. And I'm not talking culture as in DE&I. I think DE&I is an overlay of that, but we're talking cultural alignment, like the real purpose of the company and the real purpose of the individual. Those two things are not aligned. So that becomes one of the issues of the revolving door. And then we have this issue of perception of growing individual wealth. And people do not believe that they can do that within one company. They're moving quicker and they want to acquire more knowledge and more dollars. And in order to do that quicker, they've used a competitiveness to move. And so we've tried in the accounting industry to find ways to keep people longer than 3 to 5 years. Many years ago, probably 20, 25 years ago, it used to be that those were the age that people started families. That's not the issue anymore because people are starting families not at 25. Now it's 30 and 35, but they're still leaving after 3 to 5 years. So it's not because of a family, it's because of opportunity. So when we look at these things as a whole, we try to understand what kind of training is being given to the employees, training that meets the needs of those types of employees. I'm not talking about the golden handcuffs that Big Four has on people that says, we're going to pay you top dollar, $100,000 a year to be our entry level person. And then we're going to also give you money to get your master's degree so you could sit for a CPA. the golden handcuffs. What is now happening is those people that have been involved in that kind of let's throw money at it problem is that we are ending up turning out 25-year-old wealthy young people who hate their jobs and have to pay back their master's degree dollars and also can't find a job for $100,000 in any other industry and go back and live with their parents in their grown-up bedroom. So this is what we're doing. We're not really solving problems. We're turning away young people from an extraordinary industry and profession. So less people, and that's really pervasive. So those kids then tell their younger siblings, don't do what I did and don't go into this industry. And mom and dad say anything but these industries, even though you'll always have a job if you're an accountant, all of these things. And so the industry is battling that. We've given this negative connotation that you have to work 3,000 hours to have a career in this industry, in finance accounting, becoming a CFO, a controller. And that really, we've only glorified the financial analyst that works on Wall Street.
Yeah.
We've done a number on this industry.
Now, we've got two problems. Number one is we're retiring the older folk and we're not investing in retraining them. We're trying to invest in the younger folk, but we're not doing the right things to, A, possibly recruit the right people in the first place, retain them beyond the initial 3 years. I'm starting to see here that even if we're talking the finance team and all of the skills that you possibly need to make sure you're putting those things right are going to be those coming from the CHRO rather than the CFO.
Correct. And I don't think the CFO is invested in how to develop those programs. They're more day to day. So I think that what ends up happening with the CFO, because they have so many things that they're responsible for, they can get a team. It could be a small team of just ARAP, payroll people, and they'll work with them and they'll nurture them and they'll give them great tasks and give them opportunities for growth internally. That's fantastic. Then you look at companies like, for example, Tiffany and Company, large global company. Their finance team is significant. 40 people, 100 people in finance. And you have your VP of finance. It's now a little different level than your just general CFO, your VP of finance, and your VP of taxation, and your VP of all of these different levels. And they're also feeling the struggle of what's happening and the recruitment and engaging external recruiters to help them. And who, over the last 10 years, this wave of credentialing recruiters so that they could be effective and efficient on site to mitigate the costs involved in procuring staff from competitors so that you have advantage. These are real problems, and problems that generally a CFO might experience. They may see in terms of revenue models shift and not necessarily be able to attribute it to people problems, where the CHRO, like, we can actually identify through calculations where there's going to be a loss in revenue as it pertains to the people you hire.
Yeah. And I'm thinking about that recruitment process. Recruiting somebody is expensive.
Oh, treacherous. $25,000 for every $100,000 spent.
Yeah.
Then there's benefits, which become $15,000 to $25,000 per employee. So now that's an expense. Then you have the expense of payroll. Then you have a 401k expense. And then you have training dollars spent. And then for every person that you turn over after 35 days, after 120 days, the markers of expense go up. And I don't necessarily think people are recognizing, you go just to dovetail back to an aging workforce, the turnover rate for a new employee that is just new in learning how to do a job versus the turnover rate or turnover expense for somebody who has intellectual knowledge of a company is far greater.
Of course.
And we don't calculate for that in CFOville. We don't plan the succession. And that's the strategy of CHRO, is understanding how much time it will take to transition skills to transition one position to another person, succession, acquisition of talent, acquisition of skills, procuring skills.
I remember back in my early finance career, after qualifying, I spent in the chemical industry and a huge UK-based chemical conglomerate. They had some great people policies. The management level, you'd move roles every 2 to 3 years. You would be really well looked after. And I always remember one thing.
I love cross-training.
That said, do not expect somebody to be fully effective in their new role until they've been doing it for a year. Yeah.
So it's funny, I use some sports analogies here, and I don't actually have the exact number, but I think it's like 16,000 hours or some crazy number like that. My son is a D1 soccer player, and the amount of time that he spends learning his craft makes him an expert at that. It would take me, in everything that I know, to become him 10 years.
Yeah.
Doing what he does in the amount of time he does it, right? So how could we expect people to walk in and just know? And that becomes a huge problem for people that are really stretched thin, which is often the role of a CFO. Lots of hats and high KPIs, significant KPIs. And I think when we're hiring people and we don't have the time to invest in them, to really develop them into these experts, then we're really losing on so many different levels. I love the idea of cross-training people. I think it's actually, in my language, in HR language, it's called job enrichment. And there are programs about it, job sharing. These are real HR terms that have significant, qualified, researched, tested positive outcomes.
So we've talked a lot about why the CFO might not have the time or necessarily quite the right skill set or the passion to do the CHRO type of role. Just think it the other way. You've operated as that CHRO on a lot of occasions, or people working with you have done it.
For sure.
Where do you see the biggest tensions coming in between CFO and CHRO?
Control, right? And it's behavioral. I think also it's this idea of seeing everything and having all of the ability to influence. And truly, a quality CHRO will come in and partner, we own a house, right? Like we own the people house, you own the finance house. But we definitely want to be more collaborative. I do find that CFOs tend to word work because control is part of their makeup.
Well, it is, because you come through, we're seeing more and more CFOs that don't necessarily coming from an accounting background these days. But let's say for a moment they do. Well, you learned from an early to your career about internal control, about segregation of duties, about checks and balances, about drum beats, about timetables, about certain things having to be done every month on a certain day of the month or whatever. And it does develop a mindset going forward. A mindset that I think is great for some of the CFO roles, like taking over the reporting of KPIs, whether they're financial or non-financial. It all fits the nice drumbeat, the auditability, thing like that. But there are some things that really don't.
For sure. But that really, and confidentiality. I think the trust factor of having someone who has access to people, that also handoff of here's the passwords to the money, right? Like, you know what I mean? To hand that over to an HR person from a finance person is like crazy, and make sure you password protect everything. Again, it goes back to the control piece, but those two things to me are often interesting to watch. And we know about it now. We understand that there's a behavioral component, and then there's an institutional component that comes with the upbringing of a CFO. And so we're ready and armed, truly.
Rachel, that has been a fantastic look at the world of the CHRO compared to the world of the CFO. And certainly in this age where we have so much finance transformation going on, and people is such a big element of that transformation, I think it's really something we've got to get right. So, Rachel, thank you so much for being this week's guest. on the
Oh,
road.
my absolute pleasure.